to the Coders Campus podcast, where you'll learn how to code from one of the best teachers in the industry. Whether you're an absolute beginner or a seasoned pro, the Coders Campus podcast will teach you what you need to know to master the art of programming. And now, your host, Trevor Page.
Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow coders, welcome to episode 5 of the Coders Campus podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to the past 4 episodes, and I hope to continue this lovely saga that we've been on with learning about new technologies in Java and how third parties are making our lives that much easier to be web application developers in Java. Today is going to be no different. We are hitting episode 5 now. The show notes, just so you know, so I say ahead of time, are available at coderscampus.com/5. Today we're going to be diving into another new technology that these people are hell-bent on making our lives better as programmers. And this is the technology called Thymeleaf. And time is spelled like the herb thyme with a T-H-Y-M-E, Thymeleaf. Basically what Thymeleaf is, in my opinion, is a JSP killer. So essentially with the advent of Thymeleaf now, JSPs have been rendered more or less useless and extinct. They're going the way of the dinosaur. And I'm going to sort of, tell you a little bit about why I believe that's the case. And then I'm going to dive into a little bit of the, the beginning level stuff for Thymeleaf and how you can use it for yourself. And then most likely we'll hit in episode 6 the conclusion of the tutorial for Thymeleaf to get you up and running with it. But who knows? It could also go 3 parts. I don't know. I haven't been able to record this one way through already to see how long this goes. So we'll just have to see. Anyway, so why is it that I believe that JSPs are going to go the way of the dinosaur? Well, you see, JSPs are essentially hybrids. They're a way for coders to create HTML and at the same time mix in some Java. All right, so now way back when JSPs were new and shiny and first created, you could actually embed native Java code right onto your JSP. In other words, right into your presentation layer. This was accomplished by using, I think it was the open or the less than symbol, let's call it that, less than and then %, and then you would type in your straight up Java code on your JSP, and then you close it with % greater than symbol. Now, this has quickly been labeled as a horrendous programming practice that should be avoided at all costs. Because really, you're when you embed server side code right into your presentation layer, it's not a good practice at all. You should separate your layers, separate your concerns, and do it in that way, shape, or form. So fair enough, that has been well established as something bad, but we still continue to use JSPs, and instead of using embedded Java code with the syntax like I just said, less than %, and then % greater than sign. Instead of doing it with that approach, we would use something instead called tag libraries. That would add additional markup to our JSP code. So for example, we would use something like the C JSTL, which stood for Java Server Page. What does it stand for? JSTL, Java Server Page Standard Tag Library. Okay, so essentially JSP Standard Tag Library, JSTL. And this is something that I taught because that's just, the way it was. This is what we used. We used JSTLs in order to, tag libraries in order to bring in additional functionality into our presentation layer that would allow us to sort of interact with the server side without actually typing in server side code and functionality. Okay, it was just to tie the two together, to tie the presentation layer with our server side or business layer. All right. So, and this was a much better approach than using plain old Java code. Like I said, Java code was the first thing that we embedded, and it was, the way to do JSPs, and it was horrendous and horrible. So we've migrated away from that, and we've introduced tag libraries. But that still hasn't, it wasn't the greatest solution. And the reason why, it's not the greatest solution, even though this is what we were using, and like I said, I teach this stuff, most companies still use this approach. So the caveat that I'm saying here is Thymeleaf is still a fairly new technology, and companies still use the approach of using tag libraries, and that's perfectly fine. I will still teach it because you still need to learn it because I'm all about teaching you and getting you ready for real-world jobs and real-world scenarios, but I also want to teach you the shiny, new, awesome stuff that's coming down the pipeline, and because it's good to know that stuff as well. Anyway, the reason why using tag libraries wasn't the greatest solution is because we're still using non-native HTML code inside of our HTML pages. Except, well, in this case, we're calling them JSPs, but they're essentially, JSPs are essentially just HTML pages that allow you to embed non-native HTML code into it. Okay, so we're still using non-native HTML code inside of our more or less HTML pages. So remember that the convention is to separate your concerns as best as possible. So which is why we tend to take, let's say, our CSS code and our JavaScript code, and instead of, embedding the JavaScript code and embedding the CSS code into our HTML files, the convention is to extract them outside. So you'd create an external JavaScript file, so a .js file, or you would create an external CSS file, a .css file. You'd externalize them, put them in their own files, in their own directories somewhere, and then you would sort of link them up inside of your HTML page or your JSP page via the appropriate tag. So whether it be a script tag for JavaScript files or a link tag for style sheets, so CSS files. So if we're doing it that way, if we're separating our concerns out with HTML or with CSS and JavaScript, why is it that we're allowed to use glorified Java code inside of our JSPs using tag libraries? Right? Why is it that we can do that but nothing else? So really, fine. Okay. The main issue here is if we drop the argument that we should separate our concerns, then why else are JSPs a little bit, not good? Why are they a bit crappy, if you will? Well, they can't really be opened outside of the context within a web server. Okay, they can't be opened outside of a web server context. So, for example, what happens if you shut down your web server and then try to access a JSP file? Have you ever tried to do that? You've ever tried to go to a URL that forwards to a JSP file when your web server isn't running? Or what happens if, let's say, you just double-click on a plain old JSP file and try to open it inside of your web browser? It's not going to look very good. It's not going to look the way you imagine it would look. Oftentimes, a whole bunch of stuff is broken. A whole bunch of stuff is in the wrong places. Images aren't showing up. Nothing is functioning at all. You click on buttons, nothing happens. You get a whole bunch of errors. It's just horrible. It's a mess. Because, JSPs are designed to rely on web servers to render properly. In order for all the stuff to work, it needs to be run inside of a web server context. So, how can we write native HTML code, but still be able to have our HTML pages properly interact with our backend server? Essentially, what I'm saying here is there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way in which we can open up our quote-unquote JSP file and still have it, resemble somewhat of what it would look like if it was running within a web server context. Okay? This is especially useful for people like designers. Designers don't often want to work inside of a complex IDE and having to, download and compile a bunch of code and having to, set up a web server and run. They don't want to do that. Designers just want to work with plain old HTML, CSS, maybe some JavaScript too, who knows. And that's it. They want to be able to open up a native HTML file inside of a browser outside of a web server context without having to run it inside a web server and just have it look the way it should look, right? That's the dream, if you will. So how can we accomplish this? How can we write native HTML code, but still have our HTML pages be able to properly interact with our backend server? So how do we get HTML talking to Java with just using a plain old HTML page? Well, this is where we enter stage left Thymeleaf, if you will. Thymeleaf comes in and solves this problem. So first things first, I've written this down so that people who are not listening to this podcast, they know how to pronounce Thymeleaf. Yes, Thymeleaf is spelled with T-H-Y-M-E. Some people might pronounce it with, they might pronounce it as a Thymeleaf, like T-H is the, whatever, like the th sound or whatever. It's pronounced Thymeleaf, like time. Well, I'm saying it so you understand how it's pronounced if I'm saying it out loud. So anyway, just so you know, that's how the official people at Thymeleaf say that it should be pronounced. So I'm taking a page out of their book. So fair enough. Now that we've covered that very important piece of information, let's talk about Thymeleaf. So Thymeleaf solves all the problems that have plagued JSPs essentially since the beginning of time. Okay, I should say since the beginning of the time of the JSP, which really is nowhere near the beginning of time. So anyway, Thymeleaf. With Thymeleaf, you can write native HTML code that any old browser would be able to render, and yet still be able to interact as you always could with your Java server. Booyah. That is exactly the solution we're looking for. That's exactly the solution that is the nice one that separates our concerns out nicely. It allows you to, like I said, open it up inside of any old browser, even without the server running. You could still open it and have it look more or less the same as it would look if you're running it inside of the server context, and so on and so forth. And thankfully, it's not actually too tough to learn Thymeleaf. Okay, I think the grand total of number of hours I put into really learning Thymeleaf might have been 4. I might have put 4 hours of real effort into learning Thymeleaf. So it's really not that much effort to understand this stuff if you come from a background of sort of already understanding how JSPs work and how to use tag libraries. So if you're already comfortable with C tag libraries and all the other tag libraries that go into having your JSP interact with your Java page or Java server, I should say, then you have a good foundational understanding of how Thymeleaf is going to work. Okay, it's just a bit of syntax. That's slightly different syntax and a slightly different methodology, if you will. So thankfully, not too tough to learn, and I plan on teaching you most of what you need to know in this and the next podcast episodes. Does that sound good? So, getting started with Thymeleaf can either be ridiculously simple or it can just be simple. So I'm going to be talking about how to get started with Thymeleaf right out of the gate. All right. So either way, getting up and running with Thymeleaf is easier than putting essentially my socks on in the morning. That's essentially what I say. It's that easy to get up and running with it. Okay. So the first question I'll ask you is: are you using Spring Boot? Okay, Spring Boot. We talked about it in the first episode, maybe the first 2 episodes of this podcast. I can't remember now anymore. It's been that long already. I think it was just the first episode we talked about Spring Boot. If you're using Spring Boot, then you're already good to go. You literally don't have to do anything to start using Thymeleaf. Pretty simple, right? Ridiculously simple. You don't have to do anything. Good. Okay, so definitely easier than putting your socks on in the morning. But fair enough. What if you aren't using Spring Boot at all? Well, it's a little bit more complex, but still very simple. It's as simple as either putting an artifact into your dependency management system. So essentially, if you're using Maven or any other dependency management system, then you would just sort of put a line or two into, or an artifact or two into that dependency management system. Okay, or it's as easy as just manually downloading a couple of jar files and adding it to your class path. That's it. So it's really not any more complex than that. If you're using Maven, then you're going to be inserting some lines into your pom.xml file. You can go, there's a whole download page. You can go to thymeleaf.org/download.html or something like that. And you can get the instructions on how to install the whole thing. But, you can always just go, like I said, go to coderscampus.com/3. You'll see the link on that show notes page. So you'll be good to go. So let's say, for example, if you're not using Spring Boot, but you're still working within sort of a Spring-based project, so you still want to have a Spring project, then essentially you just need to add 2 libraries to your project, if you will. And if you're using Maven, it's stupidly simple. You copy-paste 2 dependencies into your Maven POM file. One is the Thymeleaf artifact, and one is the Thymeleaf Spring 4 or Spring 3 version, whichever one you're using. So the artifact Thymeleaf, Spring 4, let's say, and that's the other artifact. So there's 2 artifacts. One is Thymeleaf, one is Thymeleaf Spring, and then the version number that you're using, 3 or 4. Done. There you go. That's it. That's as simple as it gets for getting everything up and running and downloaded for Thymeleaf. So now, once you've done that, you can go into, and I should, again, say, if you're using Spring Boot, a Spring Boot-enabled application, you don't need to do that. You don't need to insert the lines that I just said into Maven or anything, because they're already ready to rock, and they can already be used inside of the context of your Spring Boot application. Hence why Spring Boot rocks. There's no really, not a whole lot of configuration needed to get up and running. So, there you go. That's how you get up and running with Thymeleaf. Next, we talk about the syntax of Thymeleaf, right? So let's say you've installed it. Now what? It's time to start writing some code. So for my code, I'm going to assume that we're working within the confines of the food diary application that we've already been sort of talking about through the first 4 episodes of this podcast. So fair enough. And you can also, if you haven't already done so, you can actually download the whole food diary application that I've been building. You can download it from GitHub. So there's a link, again, coderscampus.com/ have I been saying 3 this whole time? I think I said 3. I have a 3 in front of my eyes right now, so I think I've been saying that. It's coderscampus.com /5. Okay, because we're episode 5. My apologies if I confused you. If you're scratching your head, if I did say 3, I apologize. I meant 5 every time because we're on episode 5. Really simple stuff, Trevor, and I still managed to mess it up. Anyway, coderscampus.com/5 will get you to the right place, and you can check out that GitHub repository. Anyway, let's talk about how to write something like a simple if statement within Thymeleaf. So if we compare and contrast to the C tag library, if we were to use a C tag library, we'd have to insert a separate line of code, like a C colon something. I think it's C colon if, and then you have to write a test, the test equals, and you use Spring expression language to write in your, the actual if statement that you want to do, and then you close your C if tag, and then inside of the CF tag, you would write the code that you would want to run if that if statement was rendered as true, or evaluated as true. So with Thymeleaf, it's a little bit different. Thymeleaf, because remember, in the context of an HTML page, HTML on its own doesn't know what the C colon if tag means. Okay, there is no C if tag defined in the standard HTML, markup. There's no C tag. So obviously, if you were to run this without a server going, it wouldn't know how to render a C tag. So it would sort of just skip it, and then it wouldn't be good. So how does that compare with Thymeleaf? Thymeleaf takes a different approach. Instead of having its own tags, like a tag library, it essentially introduces attributes that you can append to existing HTML tags. So for example, if we're wanting to write an if statement, we can create a div or a span or a list, an ordered list or an unordered list, or whatever tag you want to use, whatever existing HTML tag you want to use for this if statement, you use it. So for this example, we'll use a div tag. So we'll use div. Okay, we'll have open up a div tag within the opening of the div. So we have a left chevron. We have the less than sign div. So we're still inside of the first opening div. Then we can write the if statement with Thymeleaf. So with Thymeleaf, it uses the standard way to refer to Thymeleaf is by using th. Okay, so you would define the th as an XML namespace. I'll talk about that in a second. Let's just assume we've already done that part. That's really stupidly simple to do. Don't worry. Let's just assume we've done that. So we refer to it as th. So we have a div, and we would say th colon if. So if, every time we're referring to Thymeleaf anything, we always preface it with th. Okay, or th colon, I should say. So th colon means we're working within the sort of the namespace of Thymeleaf, and we can start using Thymeleaf stuff. Okay, so th colon if equals double quotes, and then you put in your Spring expression language, so $ and curly brackets. So it's very similar to the C tag library in that the C tag library you would say test equals quotes Spring expression language. Okay, $ curly brackets. That's what you do inside of the C language or C tag library. With the Thymeleaf, you would say instead of having to say test equals, essentially the equivalent of the test equals from the C tag library is where Thymeleaf inserts itself. So instead of saying test equals, you say if equals quotes $ curly brackets. Okay, and then within the $ curly brackets, within the Spring expression language, that's where you put in your if statement. The actual, sorry, I shouldn't say the if statement, but the body of what you want to evaluate as either true or false. So the example I say div if equals quote $ curly bracket, and I say food diaries is not equal to null. So I say food diaries, exclamation mark equals, so not equals null. So I'm doing a check to see if there's something called food diaries and if it's null or not null. Is essentially what my if statement is. And what happens is this is appended to the div tag. So you would close your div tag and then do all that normal stuff that you would normally do with a div tag. So it's appended to the div tag, and it will essentially turn the entire div tag into the if statement. So if the food diaries is not null, then this div tag will render on the screen. Okay, whatever's inside the div tag will render on the screen because that's what we've told it to do. If the food diaries variable that we're checking inside of the if statement, the thif, if the food diaries is null, then it won't render that div at all. Okay, so we're getting the same functionality out of the sort of the C tag library. The only difference is we actually had to write a lot less code. Because with the C tag library, you had to add an additional sort of wrapping tag, right? The C if and closing C if tags. You have to write those tags. And then within those, then you would write whatever code that you would want to have rendered on the screen. With Thymeleaf, you're skipping that step. You don't have to write additional tags. We're embedding our sort of quote-unquote tags, but they're not really tags, they're really attributes, or properties, however you want to think about them inside of an HTML element. We're embedding that right in the HTML element. Okay? So that's really cool. We save some space in our code. We have to type less. And we have this functionality where it's a separation of concerns. We don't have to worry about having non-native HTML inside of HTML. So, and I guess that's a bit misleading. Yes, okay, thif on its own is non-native. I mean, it's not part of the HTML library, if you will, of things. But what happens is, if you're running without Thymeleaf, or if you're running outside of the context of a web server, it'll just ignore the thif. It'll just ignore it. Okay, so it will show whatever's inside the div tag, but you can actually specify what you want to show inside the div tag if, for example, if it was running outside of a server context. Web server context. We'll get into that a little bit later, maybe in part 2 of this, with some best practices and whatnot. But for now, just understand that we're not typing as much, and so we're saving space, and we're it's almost like being better for the environment. It's better for your programming environment. You're green coding now, if you will. So anyway, now I should say, what we're doing here is we were checking to see if the food diaries, because it's diaries, it's plural, that implies that it's probably a list. We're checking to see that the food diaries is not equal to null. But that's actually not the most efficient way to sort of, if we wanted to iterate through it, because that's sort of what we would do before we want to iterate through it. That's not necessarily the most efficient way to do things. So that brings me on to, the topic of how do we iterate over collections with Thymeleaf, because that's a very popular thing that one would do, is to iterate through a lists of things and stuff like that. So this one's got a bit of a stranger syntax, if you will. Most of the code that you're going to write within Thymeleaf will be wrapped entirely within the Spring expression language, which is spell for short, SPEL. Most of it's going to be wrapped entirely in Spring expression language. So, which is the, $ curly bracket stuff. But when you're performing a for each type loop within Thymeleaf, it's a little bit different. And I'll explain why. So if you want to do an iteration through a list with Thymeleaf, what you do is, you would embed, let's say we want to iterate through a list within a div tag again, which is fine. That's exactly, that's normally what we would do. We would be spitting out div tags whenever we're iterating over a list, because we want to give a new div for every, a new row essentially for every item in a list. Okay? It doesn't have to be a div tag. It could be a span tag if you wanted to. If you want to iterate over a bunch of items and have them all appear in the same line in a span, you can do that too. You could have a span tag, and you would embed the th attribute in there, but we're going to be doing a div tag. Okay, fair enough. Again, you can do this a list, for list items. You can iterate over list items. That's probably one of the most natural ways to do this. You would create an unordered list or an ordered list, and then each list item you would do the iteration with it. But anyway, the code, instead of using if, that's what we saw before, if, now it's each. So if versus each. So that implies each implies a for loop, right? So I think in the C tag library it's C for each, so they actually type in for each. In Thymeleaf it's just each, so they don't use the for, whatever, fine, fair enough. Semantics at this point. So th each. So a div, open the div tag, th each equals quotes. Now, here's where it's a bit different, because normally I would say quotes and then $ curly bracket for your Spring expression language. Normally, everything with a th in front of it, th whatever, would be encased entirely in Spring expression language. The for loop, the for each loop, I should say, is the one sort of, exception to that rule. So you do th each equals, quote, and then you put in the name of the variable that you want to use that will be assigned each individual object as we're iterating through things. So this is equivalent to, if you're talking about Java, a Java for loop or for each loop, you would say for open bracket or parentheses, and you would put in the variable type that you're going to be iterating through. So let's say string, and then you would give the variable name. So you'd say string, data, and then you put a colon, and then you put the list that you're iterating through, right? So string data, and then data list after the colon. So the data part of this is the object I'm talking about. That's the variable name that we're assigning each of the list items into. So for th each, you say th each equals quote, and then you give that variable name. Okay, like data. Okay, for example, I use a food diary object is what I call it, to be very specific. So if key is that it's a food diary object, this is not the list. This is the individual objects that we're going to be iterating through. All right, so you put in, the data, a food diary object, colon, and then you do your Spring expression language. So $ curly bracket, and then the name of the list, the collection that you want to be iterating through, and you close your curly bracket. So it's a little bit different. Normally things would be encased entirely in Spring expression language, but in this case, it's not. The very first thing is not encased in Spring expression language. I'm not sure why. I don't know why they didn't do it that way, but hey, I'm not going to complain. That's just the way it is. But there you go. That's how you iterate through items. And now within the scope of the div tag, remember you use div, th each, a food diary object, colon, Spring expression language, food diaries. Within the scope of that div tag, you can now access a food diary object. Okay, you can access it, you can access the properties of it and everything, all inside of the scope of the div tag, because that's where you defined the th each was on the scope of the div tag. If you go outside of that scope, it works just like a regular for loop. You won't have access to that variable anymore, the a food diary object variable. If you try to access it outside the div tag, it wouldn't work. Cool? So let's now talk about something else that's very common with this kind of stuff. It's displaying information from the model with, Thymeleaf. We want to display the information that's stored in the model. So this is, we do this all the time. So in Thymeleaf, there are two main ways of accomplishing this task. So the first is with another attribute called th_text. Okay, so we've heard of th each, we've heard of th_if, and now we're talking about th_text. So how do we use th_text? Well, let's assume we're working inside of the code that we were just talking about before, with the th each, where we're iterating through the food diaries list, and we're assigning each one to a food diary object, variable name. So let's say we're inside of that scope, so we're able to refer to the a food diary object that I was talking about. So inside of the scope, we want to output some data about that food diary object. Okay, so let's put another div. We'll put another div in there, and this time we'll use div th_text. So again, th:_text. Okay, there's always a colon when I say th. Sometimes I don't say it out loud, but it should always be there, syntactically speaking. So th_text equals, quote, Spring expression language. So this one's the normal one where we always wrap everything in Spring expression language. So th_text equals, quote, $ curly bracket. And then inside of here, you can start to play around with things. So let's say I'm iterating through these food diary objects, and the food diary objects, we can access a bunch of things, but maybe we want to output a sentence that says something about the food diary object that we're iterating through. So again, we do a div, th_text equals, quote, I should say double quote, $. The reason why I say double quote specifically is because I'm going to be using single quotes in this example. So th_text equals double quote, Spring expression language, so $, open curly bracket. And then I want to have a single quote now because I want to start writing out a sentence and using string concatenation. So I'll use a single quote and I'll say I had, and then I will append, so I'll do I had and then do a closing single quote, and I will append a reference to a food diary object .food. So what that does is it'll grab the actual food that is stored in that food object. So for example, pizza or, spaghetti or salad or oatmeal, whatever, right? So that's the food that's being, the actual, food itself is being contained within the .food property. So I can say, single quote, I had close single quote, plus to do your string concatenation. And then we use, because we're doing string concatenation, we use curly brackets to enclose, to wrap our reference to a food diary object dot food. Okay, we need to have those curly brackets because we're, otherwise it's not going to really know what's going on there. So we need to wrap it so it knows that this is actually a variable reference that we are making. And then, you can go on and do the same thing. So then you can do another string concatenation and say, I had, pizza, and then plus single quote, let's say I had pizza for, dinner at 6 p.m. or something. So you can do, I had, append the a food diary object.food plus I had this food for, with the single quotes, for string concatenation again, and then another a food diary object.meal type. Anyway, it's tough to translate over podcasts over audio. But the point that I'm driving at here is what you do is the th text will take whatever is rendered inside of that big thing that I'm talking about with string concatenation and everything, whatever it renders to as we're iterating through the list. So for each different a food diary object, it's going to take that, and because it's th text, it's going to insert it inside of the div. All right. So whatever it renders to, whatever it compiles to, and I guess it doesn't compile, but whatever during the process of interpreting the HTML page, whatever each line is interpreted into will be outputted to essentially to be inside of the div tags, sort of like as the text of the div tag. Okay, that's what th text is for. So there you go. You can use th text, and that will essentially output whatever it is that you type into the Spring Expression language, will output it into the contents of that div tag. So this is a dynamic way of populating your div tags, right? Very similar to, if you were to use the C language, you would be doing a C for each, and you would assign a variable, object variable. I forget what it's called. I think it's just var or something like that. You would assign a var to your thing, and then you would reference that var inside of, the div tag. The difference is we're not doing it inline here, so to speak. With the C language there, or C tag library, we can do it sort of inline in our div. So we'd write the div, and then inside of the div tags, we would start to be writing out the information that we want to have outputted. The difference here is it's not really like that. We're using an attribute called th text that will, interpret that, and then it will, throw it in line and actually make it work like you would expect it to. So cool. It's a little bit different. Like I said, check out the show notes, coderscampus.com/5. You'll see the examples I'm talking about. Anyway. But like I said, the beauty of Thymeleaf is a lot of their attributes can be used with many tags. So like I said, with th text, it can be used with a div, it can be used with a span, it can be used on li tags, pretty much you name it. And any tag that can have text inside of it, you can use a th text to assign dynamic output to that particular tag, which is kind of cool. So now I should say constantly writing th text all the time. If let's say you had a span or maybe a div that had there needed to be a lot of outputting done within that particular tag. So, div or span or whatever. Let's see if you had a lot of them, like for example, the example that I had 3 different references to, the a food diary object, right? I was writing the food, the meal type, and the time of day, so that I could say I had pizza, the food, for dinner, the meal type, at 6 p.m. That's the time of day. So I had 3 variables, and I had to sort of do string concatenation with 3 different variables. That's kind of annoying. If you just have 1 variable, that's fine. If you have 3, that gets a bit annoying. So Thymeleaf allows for a way to do inlining, to do inline text, just like you used to do with the C language, the C tag library. Okay, so now we can do the exact same thing. We can take the same functionality that we did, I almost said upstairs, the same functionality that we did previously with the th text in the div, and instead of using th text, we're going to use something called th inline. So we can say div th inline equals, quotes, text, because we're telling it, we want it to be text, inlining text. So, and we're specifying text because you can also inline other things like JavaScript. Probably we'll get to that in the next episode, but you can say th inline text to say, hey, I want to do some text inlining. And then now within the actual div itself, once we can close the div off and we're inside of the scope of the div, now we can start to write out stuff just like we would when we were using the C tag libraries. So you can actually just type in I had, so we don't actually have to type in, Spring Expression Language. We don't have to type in single quotes or anything. This is inlining. So you can just say I had, and then use your Spring Expression Language to say a food diary object dot food. Okay. The one difference here, and I'm not sure, again, I'm confused as to why this has to happen this way. Again, I'm sure they tried their best to make it not be this way, but I would love to just say I had and then put Spring Expression Language and say a food diary object dot food to reference my a food diary object. But we also need to wrap it in square brackets. 2 square brackets to be exact. So instead of saying I had and then putting the Spring Expression Language, you have to say I had, open square bracket, open a second square bracket, then your $, curly bracket for Spring Expression Language, then you put in your reference to your object, so a food diary object dot food, and then you have to close all 3 of those brackets. So a curly bracket close, a square bracket close, and a second square bracket close. So it's a bit more, it's 2 extra, well, I should say 4 extra characters to get the same job done that we used to do in the C tag library. But hey, fine. If that's the way it is, and that's just the way it is. So you say I had whatever 4, and then when you want to put in your meal type, same thing. Open square bracket, open square bracket, Spring Expression Language, and then inside of there you put a food diary object dot meal type. Okay? And then at, same thing. Double square bracket, Spring Expression Language, a food diary object dot time of day. So I had food for meal type at time of day. All those have to be enclosed within double square brackets and Spring Expression Language. But hey, at least we didn't have to do all the string concatenation and extra, just square brackets and all that extra stuff that we would have to do if we weren't doing it inline. There you go. That's where we're getting around having to do it that way. It looks a little bit more natural that way, in my opinion. But hey, sometimes, if you're just using one variable, it's a lot easier to not do inlining. It's a lot easier to just, use th text. Okay, if you just have one variable to output, use th text. Let's say if you have 2 or more, fine. Then you can use inlining with th inline equals text. Go for it. Knock yourself out. All right? Cool. Now I'm wondering, should I keep on going with the next... Let's see. What else can I talk about here? No, you know what? The next stuff that I have written down to talk about is a bit of a lengthy subject. So I think we'll call it there. We'll say that that's good enough for the teachings inside of this stuff so far. But hey, in the next episode, you're going to learn a lot more about what you can do with Thymeleaf, as well as one of the things I haven't talked about with Thymeleaf, which is really the principal purpose of Thymeleaf, which was being able to open up the HTML file in a browser and have it render and look just like it would, more or less, if you were to run it inside of a server context. So with everything I've said here, it sort of would work, because we've been talking about, using, these HTML attributes as opposed to brand new tags that, HTML doesn't understand on its own. So we sort of touched on it, but there's actually another thing that we can do to make the data be a lot more realistic in terms of what it should look like when you're running outside of a web server context. Okay, so we'll get to that in the next episode, and yes, awesome, very good. Thank you so much for listening to me today. Hopefully you got through it. Again, show notes, coderscampus.com/5, and don't forget, we're still running that contest. I haven't had that many entries for it, so that means that if you were to enter this contest, you have a very good chance of winning at this point. So I'm giving away a $100 Amazon gift card for first prize. And for second and third prize, I'm giving away memberships to my Coders Campus platform program, if you will. I think I'm doing, I said 2 months for free or something like that. I forget if I said 1 month or 2. If I said 1, whatever, I'll say 2 now. I've upped the game by another month. So I'll give you 2 months for free inside of my Coders Campus membership area, which is where you can learn about all the huge, massive quantity of stuff that I've talked about. I have a whole video library for the Java programming language, JavaScript, the SQL, so MySQL, how to create, manage, maintain, and design databases. How to, I have JPA, Hibernate tutorials. I have, Spring Security, tons on Spring MVC, Spring Framework, dependency, and there's so many tutorials inside of there with, forums access, so you can directly ask me questions on the forums. There's tests that you can take to make sure that you're actually learning the stuff as you're going through and watching the videos. I have assignments. I have weekly webinars that I record and put out every week. So every week there's a new video coming up and available. And, the students in there can vote on what they want to learn next. So they've actually voted as of right now, when I'm recording this episode on July, I think it's 8th. Yeah, July 8th. They want to learn about AngularJS. And I said, all right, fine. I don't know AngularJS, but I'm going to go and learn it for you guys. So I'm actually in the process of learning AngularJS so that I could teach it inside of Coders Campus. So second and third place will also get we'll get access to Coders Campus. Maybe I'll even throw in as a first prize on top of the Amazon gift card, I will also do a membership to the Coders Campus. So maybe I'll give away 3 Coders Campus. Look at, I'm just making it rain today. I'll give away 3 Coders Campus memberships, as well as that $100 gift card for first place to bring it in. But yeah, like I said, right now, I mean, your chances of winning one of the top 3 prizes is almost 100%. So if you haven't entered the contest already, all you need to do is leave a rating and review in iTunes for this podcast. Go to iTunes, leave a rating and review for the Coders Campus podcast, take a screenshot of your review, and send it in to me at trevor@craftycoder.com. Crafty Coder, there's no E in Crafty Coder, so if you put an E in, you're doing it wrong. trevor@craftycoder.com. Email it in to me, the screenshot of your review, and that way I will have your review tied to your email address, so I'll actually be able to contact you. Because if you just left a rating review in iTunes without emailing me, I have no way to contact you. There's no email address there. So that's why I tell you to take a screenshot and send it in to me. If you just want to leave a rating review because you're a good person and you don't care about the contest, then by all means, please go to iTunes, leave me a rating review. You can either go to iTunes, search for Coders Campus, and then click on it and leave a rating review in the rating and review section. Or I believe I've set up a link so you can go to coderscampus.com/iTunes. Let me try that on my computer just to make sure I did it correctly. coderscampus.com/iTunes. I believe that should open up an iTunes window. Well, let's see, it's not here. That's interesting. I think it will. I'm in Chrome, and for some reason it didn't, but I think it's because I said do not open programs or something like that. Anyway, if you have any troubles, you can always email me. That's fine. Unfortunately, iTunes does not make it easy to leave rating reviews, which is super annoying, but they place so much emphasis on rating reviews when it comes to the first 8 weeks of a new podcast being launched, which is why I'm putting emphasis on you guys leaving me a rating review. So the more rating reviews I get right now in the first 8 weeks of launching of this podcast, the more successful this podcast will be in the long run, and the easier it'll be for me to go out and record new free episodes so that you can continue to get this stuff for free. Sound good? Sounds good. So that's all I will say from you or to you for now. I look forward to seeing you guys in episode 6. Like I said, we're going to continue our talk on Thymeleaf and all things Thymeleaf and how awesome it is, because there's so much more that you can do with Thymeleaf. I've completely switched away from JSPs now. I don't even remember how to use the C tag library stuff anymore. I honestly don't even remember. I tried to do it the other day. I couldn't do it for someone. I was like, shoot, I had to Google it. So, yeah, we're going to be continuing our talk on Thymeleaf. I think it's wonderful, and we'll be doing that in episode 6. So I can't wait to see you guys there, or at least, I guess I won't see you, but you'll hear me. So I look forward to you guys hearing me in episode 6. And as always, take care of yourselves, happy learning, and bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Coders Campus podcast. But before you go, Trevor has a favor to ask you. In order to keep these episodes free, he'd love for you to leave a rating and review the podcast on iTunes. Just go to coderscampus.com/review to leave your own rating and review of the show. So if you have 30 seconds to spare right now, please help out by leaving a rating and review via coderscampus.com/review. It will ensure that you continue to get these awesome free podcast episodes each and every week. So if you like free swag, head on over to coderscampus.com/review. Happy learning!